There's at least one more. Is Mr. Williams here? All right. So we, it's an interesting phenomenon to speak in public, and it's pretty important for ODOT that these people speak in public. So just a simple way to recognize them for taking the time out to create these presentations and then put them on in a public speaking format. I want to recognize these people. So thanks. All right, so we have our afternoon keynote, which is Peter Voderberg from DriveOhio. Okay, he's Managing Director for Regulation and Policy for DriveOhio, a statewide center for all things smart mobility established by Governor John Kasich in January of this year. DriveOhio is bringing together those responsible for building infrastructure and regulating transportation in Ohio with those who are developing advanced mobility technologies. And I just told you this morning, this is our sweet spot now. As Managing Director for Regulations and Policy, he provides leadership and insight on complex questions of how policies at all levels of government are and will be affected by the development of these technologies. Peter has spent his entire career navigating legal and policy issues. Prior to his appointment with DriveOhio, Peter served as Assistant Policy Director and Associate Counsel in the Office of Governor Kasich. He also previously worked as a clerk for the 3rd District Court of Appeals, a legislative liaison for the Ohio Department of Taxation, and as a legislative aide in the Ohio General Assembly. Peter earned his JD from the University of Dayton Law School in 2012 and has a bachelor's degree in English from The Ohio State University. He lives in Reynoldsburg with his wife and 4 children. Please welcome Peter Voderberg.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, or I should say good afternoon. I was about to say good morning. It's afternoon. It's after lunch. So hopefully we can liven things up a little bit. I know it's hard being the person who goes right after lunch, because now it's kind of, I want to go take a nap time. And so hopefully I'm not so boring that you all fall asleep. I am a lawyer by trade, so I can talk everyone's ear off. I'll try not to do that. Hopefully you'll like what I have to say, or at least find it interesting. So here we go. My name is Peter Voderberg. I am Managing Director of Regulations and Policy for DriveOhio. So real briefly, what are we? We are supposed to be the one-stop shop for all things autonomous and connected vehicles in the state of Ohio. So anything from roadside units, onboard units, sensors in our highways, smart lanes, smart merging, autonomous shuttles, all that stuff. All that stuff is what we're working on to make sure that Ohio is ready for that technology to be deployed or tested inside the state. But the real thing that I'm sure that all of you are wondering is why? Why do I care? Why should any of you care, right? Why should we care about this new technology? And the reason we should care is problems are already existing today that the technology can solve. And to give you an example, I'm actually gonna go back a little bit. I'm gonna start with a number. Most problems start with a number. I'm sure all of you guys in your careers that most of the problems you have to deal with start with a number as well. So that is the number that I wanna start with, 100,000. That number represents the amounts of tons of manure that were produced on the island of Manhattan in 1894. 100,000. The streets were covered in manure. New York was suffering from a problem that they believed in 30 years would stack 3 stories tall. The amount of horses that you saw bringing people into and out of New York, the amount of traffic, the amount of commerce, they couldn't solve this problem. In fact, the first urban planning, the first global urban planning conference was held in New York City to address this problem. Why? Because London suffered the same problem. In London, they had estimated that in 50 years after 1894, they would have 9 feet worth of manure produced every year. You have to get rid of it. That first urban planning conference, it lasted 3 days. It was supposed to last 10, and the reason it only lasted 3 days was because they couldn't come up with a solution. The reason they couldn't come up with a solution is because they were so focused on saying, well, horses have been what we've used to get into and out of cities for 1,000 years. We'll never find a solution that's better than horses. Never, 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 right? We use horses to get people to and from. We use horses to move commerce. We use horses to get anything you want to get anywhere. We use them in our canals. We use them everywhere, right? But what was the actual solution? The car. When the automobile was first introduced, it revolutionized the way that we transported people. It revolutionized the way that we transported goods. It's a way that we made sure that we didn't have to use horses anymore. In fact, by 1912, cars outnumbered horses in New York, and by 1917, the last of the public transport horse-drawn carriages was retired. Why? Because technology solved a problem no one could solve. So technology was what solved that problem for New York. Now, what's interesting about this is that just because we had technology to solve the problem didn't mean people weren't afraid. In London, in England, as well as in Vermont and Pennsylvania, they passed things called red flag laws. Red flag laws were, people were afraid of these new automobiles, right? So you had to have a human being walk in front of your car, waving a big red flag, warning everybody that a big car was coming, and if you were afraid, you should get out of the way. That was Vermont's version. Pennsylvania's version was, okay, if you see a herd of horses or a herd of cattle, as you were driving your car around, you had to stop your car, you had to get out, you had to dismantle it, and hide it in a bush until the herd of cattle passed. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine getting out and taking apart your Tesla so that you didn't scare other motorists from your scary electric vehicle? That would be insane. But that's what happens, right? People are afraid. People are afraid of new technology until they realize its utility. So obviously, the technology got a little better. People started accepting it, and we have the car that we have today. So that's a way that technology solved a problem that no one else could solve. So I'm going to give you another number. Who knows what that number is? Or does anybody have a guess as to what this number is? That's how many crashes happened in Ohio last year alone. Just Ohio. That's not global, that's not national, that's state. Over 1,100 people lost their lives on our roadways last year. The technology that solved our horse manure problem is now causing a different problem, right? We use this, it's ubiquitous, everybody goes to and from wherever they're going in an automobile, we don't even think about it. When was the last time you even thought about an accident that happened? This is a problem. By the way, the number is not getting better. We're kind of at a tipping point. We are not seeing better numbers when we're talking about reductions in crashes. We're actually seeing them trend the other way. How many of you have a phone on you right now? How many of you have, well, I won't make you raise your hands, but lots of people look at their phones, right, when they're driving. You get a call, you use Google Maps, right? You may need to look something up, a direction. You may get a text message that you think is important and you read it, right? So we get distracted and we cause those problems. So again, what do we look for? A new solution, and that's technology. What I have up there right now, that is kind of just an illustration of what advanced driver assist systems can do. That's automatic braking. So what that does there is the car sees an obstacle in front of it, the car goes ahead and says, oh my gosh, there's something there, and it warns you. If you don't do something, it stops. Who's seen the Subaru commercial where it's the couple that get into the accident and the guy's like, I didn't see it, and they pull back and the car stops? Have you seen that commercial? That's what this is. That car doesn't get distracted. That car doesn't shave on its way to work. The car doesn't eat a bowl of cereal or try to dip a chicken finger in cane sauce, which I may personally be guilty of when I'm driving to and from my job. But that car can actually help you be a better driver. In fact, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has said that that technology by itself has caused a 30% reduction in claims for cars that are equipped with it. Think about that. 1/3 fewer accidents. Now, arguably, there might be more accidents. I have to correlate this, right? I'm sorry. As a numbers person, correlation isn't causation. There's 1/3 fewer claims, which could always mean there are a couple of accidents that are still happening that they don't have claims on. But for the most part, 1/3 fewer claims, you can think of, well, that means there's 1/3 fewer crashes. Now, the technology is still expensive, so you won't see a reduction in your rates if you have all these awesome bells and whistles. I'm sorry, at least not yet. But we're seeing this technology already starting to solve the problem, right? But just like I talked about a minute ago with the red flag laws, we have fear. Every one of these movies that I have up there depicts technology running amok, right? Everything from Tron, where the OCP goes ahead and gets into the Pentagon. If anybody's seen that movie, it's pretty old. You know, Westworld, the entire system breaks down and starts killing people, right? We have tons of pop culture references where once we give technology power, the technology uses it against us. And you might be asking why WALL-E's up there, but I want to remind everybody that the computer in WALL-E that keeps them from going back to Earth, okay? So it's a bad computer, right? Don't think that Disney film shows that cute robot's a good guy. The bad guy's still a robot, so don't forget that. So what do? I love this graphic because I've used this with my parents before. But the truth is, once we find that technology has a utility, right? We grow to accept it. Yeah, so I'm glad that people are chuckling. So if you remember, when I was a kid, when I was growing up, we didn't have, an Amazon Echo. So my mom would say, my mom would say things like, oh, you shouldn't say that on the phone, you never know who's listening, right? But my wife, just the other day, was doing this exact thing, where we were in our kitchen, and we were listening to some music, and my wife was like, okay, play the My Little Pony soundtrack for the 3 millionth time for my daughters, and Amazon Echo went ahead and did it, right? So something we were afraid of before, like who's listening, we go ahead and say, well, no, we see the utility of using this thing, so we go ahead and let it into our lives. So that's one of the things that we're working on, right? We're trying to make sure that people understand that this technology has the capability of solving problems, and we're hoping to deploy it in a safe way so that people aren't afraid of it, so that people don't fight against it, so that we don't have a red flag law. I can tell you, the legislature in the state of Ohio is already tackling this problem and is already afraid. There's a piece of legislation out there today that says that if you have an autonomous vehicle, if you own one, I don't think it will apply to your Tesla, but if you own an autonomous vehicle, you have to have a CDL to operate it. It's the equivalent of saying, hey, you can buy that Model T, you got to hitch it to a horse. All right? We already see that people are afraid of this technology because they don't understand it. How many people heard about the crash in Arizona where the autonomous vehicle struck and killed someone? Right? Yeah, that's awful. It's going to happen. And it's scary, right? How many people heard of the Las Vegas crash where the autonomous vehicle on its inaugural run actually ran into a truck, right? Did you know in that story, the vehicle didn't hit the truck hit the vehicle? But that's not the interesting thing, right? Because it goes back to that fear. Recently, there was another accident where a GM that was equipped in autonomous mode struck a motorcyclist and the motorcyclist fell over. And that was the headline, autonomous vehicle strikes motorcycle. What they didn't tell you is that the motorcyclist was cited by the police for illegally changing lanes, and that's why he got hit. Right? Because it's scary. Like I said, you saw those movies, right? We think that giving up that little bit of power to technology means that we run this risk of technology destroying us. So we're focused on making sure that people understand that technology has a utility. It isn't just something that we do for fun. It isn't just something that's neat and nifty. It's something that actually serves a purpose. So to that end, we are DriveOhio. DriveOhio is in the center. You can read this. I always hate putting up slides that have lots of words because you're going to look at that and read it. I could say gobbledygook right now, and most of you wouldn't pay attention because you'd be reading all the things that are on the slide. But this is who we are. DriveOhio is in the center. Those are the 9 state agencies that we are linked to. Those 9 state agencies are people who otherwise have a hand in dealing with autonomous and connected vehicles. You may ask yourself, well, why is the EDGE in general up there? It's because they're the ones who are going to help us do penetration testing when we're talking about setting up networks that are supposed to be secure. We're doing the best we can. PUCO is up there because trucks are actually regulated not necessarily by the Department of Public Safety, but a lot of the underlying regulations are through the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. So that's why they're up there. And then you see in blue, those are all of our working groups. Those working groups are dedicated to actually tackling specific subjects inside of the big, grander vision of autonomous and connected vehicles. That's the boring slide. Here we have the 4 pillars. These are the 4 things that DriveOhio is dedicated to. And I'll go over each of them briefly. Safety, I've already touched on it. Safety means 2 things. 1, we want to make sure the technology is safe, right? So we don't want to deploy technology that is going to have the same thing that happened in Arizona. The executive order that the governor signed that laid out the parameters for autonomous vehicle testing in the state of Ohio requires autonomous companies to go ahead and give us some proof of how they're safe, whether that be a VSSA, which is a voluntary safety standard assessment, or whether they give us some other assurance. And we also reserve the right to say, if you make a mistake, we can tell you that you can't test in the state of Ohio anymore. But when we also talk about safety, we also want to make sure that the cars that are deployed here are making us safer. So we're not just talking about deploying autonomous vehicles, we're doing a lot of connected infrastructure. So from a safety perspective, I'll get into some of these projects later, but we're talking about projects where we'll make sure that if you're going to run a red light, the light holds the red for the other car so we don't have a T-bone. If you're going to merge, it helps you do a smart merge so that we don't have accidents. These are the kinds of things that we're hoping to achieve with safety. And again, once we can prove that the technology is safe, we'll be able to kind of show people that this is a technology that's useful in their daily lives. So next one I want to talk about is reliability. So usually when we think of reliability, we think about that, right? Congestion. How many people got stuck in a traffic jam in the last month? Raise your hand, right? How many of you were happy about it? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay, well, one person, thank you. So there's always one, right? But most people hate being stuck in a traffic jam. So when we talk about reliability, a lot of the beginning stuff we're talking about is congestion, right? We want to make sure that our roads are clear, that when you leave your house, that you know when you're going to get to where you're going every single time you go. So that you don't have to go, well, maybe it's 20 minutes today, maybe it's an hour today. You know, maybe I have time to drop the kids off at school before I go to work. Maybe I can go to the grocery store on the way home because I know I'm not going to get in a gnarled traffic jam. But it's not just that. Let me ask you another question. How many of you drove a car here today? How many of you drove a car here today by yourself? Yeah, over 80% of all the trips in the state of Ohio involve you driving by yourself. And let me ask you another question. What's your car doing out there right now? Nothing. It's not doing anything, right? What's it doing when it's in a garage? Nothing. It's not doing anything. What's it doing when it's at a meter? Nothing. It's not doing anything. When we talk about reliability, we're also talking about making sure that we can clear the congestion out of our cities, right? So currently, we're talking about getting you and your car to a place where it can go and stop in a timely fashion, right? So how many of you gone to a new city and been like, oh, I don't know where to park, and you had to drive around the block a couple times, right? I've done it. I mean, I'm sure most of you have done it, right? Well, why? We have the technology available right now from safe parking and smart parking, so we can go like, well, you should just go to this garage. It's a block away. We'll get you to where you want to go. But in the future, and I'm going to go a little science fiction here for a second, in the future, why do we have that at all, right? We build our cities, we build our houses and our residences and our neighborhoods around cars, not around you, but around cars, right? I worry about where you're going to park your car, right? If I want to have a business, where are you going to be able to park? Heck, half the time you park your car and you leave it there, right? How many of you, I mean, there are lots of times where I go to the city, I park my car, and I walk a whole bunch of places and come back, right? So we currently aren't building our cities and our infrastructure around the people that use it, but around the vehicles. And autonomous and connected vehicles give us a way to change that. And lastly, from a reliability perspective, we also want people to know, like, if the route has changed, we want you to know so you don't accidentally get into a place where you're like, oh, the bridge is out and I didn't know, and Waze told me I could drive there and it was wrong, right? So we want to make sure that we have accurate and up-to-date information that's provided to all of the people that are on our roadway system. So after reliability, we talk about mobility. Mobility is a big thing for a lot of people. I'm going to be honest. My son has cerebral palsy and is blind. So he comes to me all the time and goes, hey, when can I drive? And I say, you're not 16. That's my answer right now. I will come up with a better answer when he's older. And the reason I do that is because this technology provides people who have mobility issues the capability of getting to and from where they want to go. Because I've heard a lot of people, and people will say things like, well, I love to drive. And my answer is, well, but most people don't love to drive, you like to get places, right? Like, you don't necessarily go, oh, I really just want to go out and drive around for 3 hours and come home and do nothing, right? Most people are like, I want to go to the store, I want to go to the beach, I want to go somewhere, you know? And especially when we're talking about people with mobility issues, currently, if you want to go to the pharmacy, to the doctor, and you live in an impoverished area, or you have disability needs, you might have to call up to 48 hours in advance. And if that car picks you up and drops you off at your doctor's appointment 15 minutes late, you get to sit in the doctor's office for 2 hours while you wait for them to come back. That's our current solution. That's not acceptable, right? With autonomous connected vehicles, we're going to see a future where you can actually have on-demand shuttle services, on-demand vehicle services to get people to and from where they want to go. And it isn't just going to be for people when we're talking about mobility needs. We're talking about getting people food, right? There's a lot of people who don't live close to a grocery store, who don't live close to a place where they can get fresh produce, you know, healthy food, healthy options. We've talked to Kroger about having the possibility of autonomous food delivery to neighborhoods that don't otherwise have access to it, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about mobility. We're also talking about people who need to get to healthcare, like I just said, you know? We have certain neighborhoods where 10 blocks mean 20 years in life expectancy. right? Means if you live 10 blocks from one of your neighbors, that neighbor's gonna live to 80 and you're gonna live to 60. Why? Because you don't have access to healthcare. Because you don't have a bus that gets you there, you don't have a car option that gets you there, and you can't necessarily afford it, right? So when we're talking about this technology, it's a way to get, in a low-cost manner, to get people to and from those appointments. We're also talking about entertainment, right? One of the circulators we're talking about with the city of Youngstown is the possibility of using this to get to their entertainment district. It won't just do that. But we want to, if, you know, you shouldn't be cut off from where you want to go to have fun just because you can't get a ride, you know? I mean, these technology solutions have the capability of being able to open up all new areas for all new types of people. New concerts, new experiences, new places to go, even going to a park, right? I mean, you shouldn't be bound to your home just because you can't get out and about. And lastly, getting you to a job. You know, when I was a kid, in my first interview, I remember the interviewer looked me right in the eye and he was like, "Do you have a way to get here?" Now, at the time, I could say yes because I had access to transportation. But there's a lot of people in Ohio and nationwide who can't say yes. You know, they can't say, yes, I have a reliable means of getting here. They're relying on parents. They're relying on loved ones. They're relying on bus routes that may be, you know, very long apart between rides. So if you miss your one bus, then you're waiting an hour and you're going to lose your job. You know, we're working with employers and other people to make sure that we can provide access to transportation to get people to and from major job hubs. So that's a big deal. And lastly, workforce. So we're talking about today's workforce. There's going to be some people who are displaced. Now, to be clear, a lot of times you hear about, oh, well, what about the truckers? Well, the truth is we have a trucker shortage. We do not have enough truckers today to be able to get all of the goods that we want to move around. We're hoping that this technology has the capability of supplementing that so that you can have truckers go further and longer using technology as a guide so that they're continue to be safe. But the truth is, 50 years from now, we may not have trucking jobs the way that you look at them today. So we want to make sure that today's workforce, whoever might get displaced from this technology, that they have the capability of having a new job in the new workforce. So we are also talking about the emerging workforce, right? People who are graduating from high school, graduating from college. We want to make sure that they